there, it's Amanda here from Lolli Lulu Crafts, and today I have a card for those men in your life. Although of course technically it doesn't have to be for a man, but I guess it's kind of aimed at those. Look at the sentiments there, it's talking about dads, etc. So I hope you enjoyed, and let's get crafting. So for this card, I know that I want to create a mask because I want to sit my whiskey glass in front of my decanter. So what I've done is taken a piece of acetate and a piece of this adhesive paper, and I've just stamped both the glass and the decanter because I know I'm going to want it later. Then I've just peeled the sticky paper off the acetate, and then I'm going to cut around both elements and then stick them back down onto the acetate. I don't want to cut the acetate as well, it just makes it a lot easier to do it that way. So next we're on to the front of my card. So I've taken a piece of the Stampin' Up! Whisper White cardstock, and I want the layer that I'm stamping onto to be the shape of this die cut, this beautiful die cut from Sue Wilson. All details of products used will be in the blog post, so just hop on over there for the details of exactly which die it is. But in order to be sure that I'm going to be stamping within the shape, all I'm doing is I'm doing a pencil line around the outside. You want to go around the outside because then the die cuts inside of that very slightly. It's only a little bit, but it's just enough to obviously not show your pencil line, but also it's not so much that when you stamp that you're going to be so far out, long as you know that it's just a little bit bigger than your actual die is going to be. So with anything, when you want something in front of something else when you're stamping, you want to stamp the item that is the thing that you want at the front first, and then you mask that off, and then you stamp the thing that you want to be behind next. I know it sort of feels like you ought to do it the other way round, but it does work obviously this way round. So it's always just remember the first thing that you want to stamp is the thing that you want at the front of your design. So in this case it's my glass, so I've stamped that in the beautiful VersaFine because I'm going to be using a water-based markers. I'm using the Stampin' Up! Right markers, which are water-based rather than alcohol-based. I'm then going to put my mask over my little glass here, and then I'm going to stamp my decanter. So then the big reveal, peeling off the mask, and you can see how fab it looks with that sitting in front. And then next I just wanted to add a second glass, so I just stamped that off to the right hand side. So next I was making my card base, so I took a piece of the A4 Smoky Slate card, I cut it to 7 inches and then I scored it at 5 inches to create a 7x5 card base. This is going to be a landscape card. So next I took a piece of basic grey cardstock and I cut that to be a matte on the front but also on the inside, and I cut it to 4 3/4 by 6 3/4 so that it would fit as a 1/4 inch down from our card base. I then adhered the one that was for the inside only to the inside, and I left the layer for the outside because I needed to do some other bits and pieces to it which I couldn't do once I'd stuck it down. So the first thing I wanted to do was add some pattern cardstock, which was from a 6x6 pad by Studio Calico. So I cut it to 4.5 so that it would match the layer top to bottom, but obviously it was too short crossways, but that didn't matter because I was going to add another piece to the other end. So I stuck the first piece down because it was easier to do it like that. So you can see that it was 4.5 and then there was just that little gap at the end. I then took my other piece, this lovely grey piece, which I had also cut to the 4.5, and then I flipped it over and I marked how far over I wanted it to come across. Then I cut that using that pencil mark as a guide, and then again using my tape pen I just stuck that layer down on top of the other one. Now obviously if you wanted to save a bit of paper you could have cut the first layer a little bit less across if you wanted to, but because I wasn't 100% sure how far I was going to take the grey, I didn't want to risk that. So then the reason I couldn't stick that basic grey layer down was because I wanted to add this beautiful grey grosgrain ribbon. This is actually from American Crafts. It's something I've had in my stash a long time, so I don't know if they do this specific one anymore, but I'm sure you can get grosgrain ribbon or any ribbon that's sort of grey. I'm sure that even Stampin' Up themselves would do a basic grey ribbon that would be able to be used. So all I did there was to make sure that it stayed on the line where the two papers matched, was I put a little bit of my tape pen down that centre line. I don't usually do that, but with the grosgrain it doesn't really show, so it just helps keep it in that particular position, because I really wanted it to cover that line between the two papers. And then on the back I just added a little bit of tape pen and pulled those little tabs round and stuck them down, which was obviously why I couldn't stick this layer to the front of my card base yet, because I wanted to tuck those ribbons behind. So now I've done that, the next thing I want to do is adhere this layer to the front of my card. And because it had a little bit more on it, including the ribbon, I decided to use my wet glue. In this case I used my Hunky Dory construction glue, and that just gives it a little bit more strength and it will stay put on the front. At this point I wasn't sure whether I wanted to add a little bow, so I just left things as they were and thought I would come back to that if I decided I wanted to do that. I then decided that I had these little scraps left over from the pattern cardstock, and it would be really nice to draw that into the inside of the card. So I just took that little piece, and again you can see I just marked it up, and I'm going to cut it to size and then stick it down onto the inside of the card just to add a little connection to the front. So now we get to the colouring, and I'm using the Stampin' Up Bright markers. Now if you haven't quite get these colours, it's a little bit too quick or anything, don't worry, I will list them on the blog post. As I said before, just go to the link below this video if you're on YouTube. Now normally I would, 1, put music on when I'm doing colouring, and 2, I would speed it up. But I have the last couple of times done some voiceover with it, because I thought that some of you had sort of suggested that it would be helpful kind of to explain exactly what I was doing and why I was doing what I was doing. So what we're doing here is, this is watercolor based, or rather water based pens, but I'm not using watercolor paper. So I am going to be using water, but I am going to have to be quite cautious, because if I'm not careful I will very much warp the paper and just wreck it. So I'm starting off with the paler of the blues, and I'm literally just going over the areas that have got marks on it that have been indicated by the artist as being the darker areas. Now any crystal will likely have some sort of little bit of bluey kind of hue to it, something, you know, to give it that crystal icy look. So by just adding a tiny touch of the blue, it's just indicating that we've got glass there. So I'm just using the artist's lines to help me. Now at this point I hadn't decided to use the water. It was only later that I thought that actually it would help the work and it would actually make it soften down. So at this point the reason I've done so much is because I hadn't decided to use the water. Normally I would have done just a small amount so that the marker stayed wet enough that it would blend through a lot easier. Now it still does move with the water, but it is a lot simpler to not do that. Now as you saw, I then went to the darker of the blues, and I just went even closer to the dark parts where the artist had shown those dark lines, and I stayed even closer to that. But I'm pretty rough with how I'm colouring in, even here with this beautiful, I think it was a perfect colour for whiskey, I think, or at least an indication of whiskey. However, what I did feel was that I did it a little bit flat through the ice cubes, and you'll see when I do the next glass that I slightly change it, and also when I add the water I'm able to slightly lighten certain areas on the ice cubes to make them look a little bit more depth and stuff. But here again I'm starting with the paler colour. I kind of just went across the lot, and then I added the darker colour. It was at this point that I thought it really did need just softening down. It was just a little harsh. I felt it just felt like it was like hiss and blue, and I was trying to make it more soft and more like crystal would be. It's just like an indication of that kind of bluey hue that you get, and so I just thought adding that water would help. And you can see I've got quite a dry brush, and what I'm doing is almost scrubbing with the brush so that it blends that colour out. Now, even with watercolour paper, that's the same sort of thing that I do. I don't use a massive amount of water unless I really want to go for a very watery look, with like a real watercolour look. And here, as you see, I'm now going back to the ice cubes, and I'm just really scrubbing into those just to try and lighten them compared to what's around to it, because the ice cubes are paler. They're not the colour of the liquid. They are a clear, so they're picking up the colour of the liquid, but they will look lighter. And what I did was, by colouring straight over them, I made them all the same colour. Now obviously there will also be darker patches where the ice cubes are picking up shadows and stuff, so we still need to add those in. The other thing is, of course, you're going to have reflections in the upper part of that ice cube of the liquid, but you're also going to have the bluey tone of the ice, so you want to have a very small amount of that, just like a hint. You almost don't want to see it. It's almost one of those things where you colour it and it's almost not visible to you, but had you not put it in, it would have looked flat. It's kind of like that. It's sort of like you add it to not see it, but if you hadn't have added it, you'd have noticed it wasn't there. It's a kind of weird thing. So here with this glass, you can see I'm being a little bit more cautious about that. I leave a gap here on the ice cube that's pretty much uncoloured, and then I've got a lot less of that first tone of the liquid ambery colour. I can't remember the names of the colours, and then I go in with the darker one, and you can see I'm still adding that shadowing. Even though I've got quite pale on that ice cube, I'm still adding that darker colour to it. And then again, I'm going in with my paintbrush and just some water, and I'm just scrubbing it out. It literally really is sort of scrubbing it out, and it will slightly still distort the paper, not distort it, yeah, slightly distort it, but I knew that I was going to stick it down, so I wasn't too worried. But I was still being kind of observant of the effects of the water on the paper, because I was aware that it wasn't watercolour paper. As I said, had I perhaps thought about it and realised that perhaps I would be using water, I may well have used a watercolour paper. I'm not sure it mattered in the end. I think that the amount that I used was okay. I didn't actually feel like I needed to do more, so I think it worked. But if you wanted to go for that really soft, liquidy, watery look of the liquid, then you would need watercolour paper for that. Now you can see here I've added a little bit of that gold colour coming through the glass, but I'm really softening that down. It's going through 2 layers of the glass itself, plus obviously the decanter, so it is going to be paler than the actual decanter, and so I'm just really softening that down. I then went over with the water over the decanter. I wanted to kind of blend the blue into the ambery colour and soften that ambery colour down again. I then went back with a darker sort of amber colour, I think this is Bumblebee, over that wetter area, and it just helps actually when you colour it. Kind of sort of starts blending itself in because it's slightly damp. And then I just went back again just to really finish just softening that into the background sort of amber colour, and it's just adding that little bit of depth to that colour and that decanter. And then again, I just wanted to add a little bit more blue around the edges here, and just to add a little bit of depth to those edges and corners, just where when the water dries, what you find often is it softens down even more than it appears when you first start sort of blending it in. So you want to let it dry, see how it looks, and then add any extra depth that you feel you need. Then I took the marker and you can see all I was doing was just putting some of the colour onto the paintbrush directly. I first of all did a little tiny bit of the blue onto the sort of blank area of glass, because otherwise it was just completely plain. And again, it was one of those where you notice its absence rather than you see it when it's there. And then I just added a bit of grounding using smoky slate on the bottom there, again using that direct to paintbrush technique. So next we're moving on to our sentiment, and I've taken a strip of that lovely grey cardstock and some VersaFine ink. Now I wanted it to be really black, but as I've said in the past, when you have a sentiment, I personally don't like pressing down really hard, which obviously would then get you that lovely depth of colour. However, if you're not careful, what happens is it kind of squishes the letters out sideways and makes them kind of fatter and less crisp around the edge. So if you've got a stamp platform, if you can go several times, you can go very lightly and you then have a much crisper look. So now we're back to our centerpiece, and we're just using that die cut that we drew around on our piece of paper to give us the shape, so we knew where to stamp. We're now die cutting that out. The pencil line will be outside of that die cut, so you don't have to erase it. And then all I'm doing is I'm adding some foam tape strips on the back. I peel the backing off, and then I add some strong wet adhesive to it. I always say to you guys that personally I find, however good foam tape it is, that after a while in central heating it doesn't seem to last as well as a regular glue. So if you want it to really last, and quite often these handmade cards people want them to last, add a bit of this extra glue to it, and one, it gives you some maneuverability time, and two, it'll mean it will last. So then I took my sentiment that we stamped, I chopped a little bit off the end as you can see so that it fitted on there, but I needed then to measure exactly how long I needed it to be. So I just popped it in position, put a pencil mark, and then cut it to size. I then worked out, and I just used my fingers to turn it over and then put a bit of pencil on the back where I need foam tape, because obviously there's foam tape for my actual design, so the sentiment needs to be flat there, but it needs foam tape on the bit of the pattern paper. So I needed to know where the foam tape needed to start and finish and where the flat glue needed to start and finish. So I just used a pencil mark to work that out. I added the foam tape, added my wet glue, and stuck that sentiment down to the front of the card, and that was it. And I thought actually this pattern paper looked really nice with it. It drew all the colours together, I thought, really well. It seemed to me almost like it was meant for it. It was such a lovely collection for that design, and that was that. This was a card that I used for Father's Day, but obviously it could be used for birthdays, it could be used even for Christmas. Actually, you could jazz it up and make it into like a Christmas card if you use different colour in the background. So, you know, I think it could be used for lots of different occasions, and I think it was a really nice stamp set. I really enjoyed using it. So thank you so much for watching. As always, don't forget to go to the link below the video. I will have a ton of photos on that blog post, plus list and links to all the products used, and of course you can subscribe to me while you're there. And if you subscribe to me using the website, you will get an email telling you every time I post a video. Obviously you can also subscribe to me here on YouTube, which I would love. I would also love it if you enjoyed this video to give it a thumbs up and all of the else of that stuff that you are always told to do when you watch YouTube videos, and I try not to do too often. Okay, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again next week. Bye for now. Bye.